friends. Welcome to the Creative Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Caldwell, and I'm so happy you're here. Each episode, I take some time to chat with fellow artists about life, faith, and the impact of the arts. Happy 2023, everyone. I'm so excited for all that's in store for this coming year. And to kick off 2023, I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Luke LeFevre. Luke has led many creative teams over the years and most recently served as the Chief Creative Officer for Ramsey Solutions. Luke led the branding, design, and video teams that served all of Ramsey Solutions. You may recognize names like the Dave Ramsey Show, the Rachel Cruze Show, EveryDollar, Financial Peace University. Luke has been a part of all of these and so much more. Through over 20 years of experience working with creatives and business owners, Luke has seen time and time again that people have an internal pull inside of them towards creating. In our conversation today, Luke shares more about this idea of the pull and what that might look like in your life. He shares about the idea of holy work and how we can walk this holy path in our lives, going through the various stages that lead to unlocking that pull and really living a fulfilled life. I first heard Luke speak about this on EntreLeadership Podcast back a couple years ago, and it was super impactful for me personally. So I'm so excited to get to introduce you to him today and also for you to get to hear more about his work. Enjoy my conversation with Luke LeFevre. I'm so pumped and excited to be here with Luke LeFevre today. Welcome to the podcast, Luke.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yes, and it's super fun because we were just talking about this before we started recording, but I actually heard you on the EntreLeadership Podcast back. I was looking back on Spotify and when that was February 2020.
2020, yeah.
So even like pre-pandemic and everything.
Yep.
And so I remember hearing that, and I probably listened during the pandemic is my guess. Okay. And just really feeling like so connected to the message that you were sharing and about, your life. And I am a fellow Enneagram 9, or I identify as a 9. So
exhausting, isn't it? It's exhausting.
It is trying to maintain good relations with everyone. Anyway, but so it just really struck a chord with me, and I, reached out. But it's one of those things where social media, you have like your feed or your messages from people you're actually friends with, and then kind of the random general messages that get like lost in internet world. And so what was so cool was you seeing that in the last couple of months and being like, oh, hey, I totally didn't see this here. And I feel like God has the perfect timing for.
I do too. It was during, 2020 was just chaos in a bottle. And so it was like everything was crazy for a good year and a half, 2 years. And then, you get your head out of the water and you're like, oh, there's a third layer of messages here in Facebook Messenger I didn't even know about. And I don't use Facebook that much. And so it was like, oh, shoot, I feel like a big jerk for not responding to you.
Oh, no, you're all good. I'm just like so excited that you did respond. And
cool,
just seems like perfect timing. And it's really cool seeing how, your journey has progressed since then. And I'm sure we'll get into that. Yeah. And even for me, like life has shifted. So it's cool to see just this timing. Hopefully it'll be a really good moment for this. So
I agree. Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
For sure. Well, do you want to just give our listeners a little bit of your background? I know you worked at Ramsey Solutions for over a decade, right?
I did. I worked there for 14 years. I started as a senior designer there, a senior web designer. And before that, I was at a couple agencies. I was at a agency just outside of Chicago and did anything and everything that the clients needed at those places. And that translated really well into Ramsey Solutions. And I have a passion for pulling out like what's underneath everything. And so design and writing is usually like you get asked to do these design things and then you work on it. But then as you're going through the process, you realize what's really needed. I heard this funny quote that said, a good designer takes everything that somebody asked for and fits it on the page well. A great designer convinces them half that crap is not even necessary. And like so just over time, you start to dig around in what the real stories are. And so my time at Ramsey, incredible time. Like I love Dave. I love everyone over there, still have great relationships with everybody. And was just a slow pulling out of what's underneath. And I wanted the whole story to go together better, more than just the design. So it'd be like, hey, why don't we have the videos match the copy? And why doesn't the copy match what's on the website? And so that was what a lot of my time there was, is taking what was a bunch of different looking stuff and sounding stuff, and slowly with a incredible team, making it all feel like it's coming from the same family. Like that's what I had a lot of time there. And the last 3 to 5 years, I started to have this other vision for some of this holy work stuff that I talked about on the Entree podcast. And
yes.
I struggled with it for a long time. Like, oh, what do I do with this? And how do I mix these together? And ultimately, I just felt really pulled to talk about this and coach people through it and write about it more. So much so that I couldn't ignore it. And so fighting and clawing and gnashing of teeth later, I mean, it did. It took probably a good year and a half to accept what I was feeling pulled towards. So
yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you are following that pull and, starting to really dive into this work, because I think it is super valuable. And I feel like people are going to really resonate with what you're talking about. And
I hope so.
I'm excited because I think there's a lot of people who feel like there's more and that they really, want to dive deeper into something, but either maybe out of fear or the unknown or whatever, the resistance that we'll talk about, all of those things, we kind of don't take that next step. And so this is a really, I think, valuable work that you're doing as well.
Yeah,
so.
It manifests itself in like a few different ways. I was talking to somebody the other day, and she was probably around 40 years old. And she was like, I feel stuck. Like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And it was kind of that unsettled feeling. And once you dig into some of the things that God has put into your spirit since before you were born, I think.
Yeah.
And then those first 8 to 10 years of your life, before anybody tells you it's a bad idea, or you get discouraged or, beat up on it or something, like there are clues to where God has been pulling you your whole life. And so it kind of manifests itself as that unsettledness or stuck feeling. But then on the other side, there's this feeling of like, what's next that some people have, and searching through like, what is it? What is that next thing? And those are the big like life versions of it. But I also, as I've talked to people, there's smaller versions of this holy work process that I'll talk about. But the smaller versions are like where, you kind of pull up to a stoplight and there's someone there with a sign saying they need help. And, oftentimes we really feel pulled, but we get scared and we roll up the window and you get nervous and you don't do anything about it. Well, those are pulls too, or even as small as, man, I really feel like my daughter needs some extra time in the next couple of days, and I feel pulled in that direction. Yeah. And then do I listen to it or not? Like the pulls are ultimately from God, and he's trying to create something amazing with you, whether it's a relationship or a big turn in your life or something, but he's always there trying to create something with us.
I love that so much. And I'm curious kind of where this idea, and actually we didn't even really dive into what is holy work to begin with. Yeah. Do you want to give just like a synopsis? Sure. And then we'll get into where did this get started?
Yeah, it's kind of a process that was like unveiled over time. Like I always loved writing. I love speaking. I love talking about this stuff. And over the years at Ramsey, I was the chief creative officer there, and we had a giant team, and I just loved talking to them. And I had this thought that, man, one day I'd love to write a book, Yeah. And I didn't really even know what it would about, but I loved the God side of things. I loved the leadership side of things. I loved the pushing yourself side of things. And it was probably 4 years ago. My wife had this great idea that we should put a note card in our stocking and write something we liked about the year before and something we wanted to accomplish in the next year.
Ooh, yeah.
And so I have 4 kids. And so we all wrote something on this, and we put it in our stocking that we would read the next year. Right. And so I wrote on this thing, I'm going to write this book, So a year goes by and I didn't write the book. And so I pull out the stocking and it says it. And I'm like, geez, And so that happened a couple times. And going into 2020, it was actually the end of 2019. I pull out that stocking for like the 3rd time, and this note card is on it. And I just said to myself, I'm not going to disappoint myself again. Like I'm not going to write that again. I'm focused on my work here at Ramsey, and maybe that's just a distraction,
Mm.
But I did have this little poll that said, hey, what if you just gathered up all the writing that you've done and the speaking and put it together to see what was there? And so I went to a little coffee shop here in my town.
Coffee shops are the best for thinking and writing.
For
Maybe that's a
thinking.
9 thing, but just like all
Yes,
the productive vibes that are happening, but no one's
that's
actually
true.
talking to you.
Yes, you can like observe all the action without being bothered by anybody. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's perfect. Especially if your headphones are noise canceling.
Yes.
I think.
There you go.
So anyways, I pulled together all this writing and it came to a bunch of words, and I was like, well, okay, what if I start organizing all this stuff? And so that's when I started organizing all this writing, and I got little note cards out and I wrote the subject line of everything on it. And it came to this, it covered up my whole table. And I was like, well, okay, this kind of sounds like this, and this kind of sounds like this. And it turned out there were 7 little piles. Actually, it was 6 at the time, but as I've worked through this over the past couple of years, it's turned to 7. But there were 6 little piles, and each of them was a stage. And I didn't know this was a stage at the time, but like one of your questions was like, how did this come about? But these 6 stages are just part of my life and what I've seen in other people. And these 6 stages were, the first one was the pull. Like as a creative, and personally, I think everyone is creative. They just don't acknowledge it.
Right.
But so there's this pull that you to do something. I'm not sure what it is. It's different for everybody. But there's this little pull to create something, whether it might be spreadsheets and math for people. It might be starting a family for somebody else. But we have these little nudges. And the second part was the proof that God put that thing there. So there was a bunch of writing about the proof that God put it there. Then the third part was about the war that happens inside of us when we start to acknowledge this pull. So you have the pull, you have the proof, then you have the war that happens. And then a bunch of writing on the fourth part, which is the practices. What kind of things are you doing in your life to keep yourself connected? So the pull, the proof, the war, the practices. Then you hit the glorious wilderness where you just have to show up and you just got to do the work over and over again.
Yep.
And right in the middle here, this is the part I've added recently because it's what I feel like God's teaching me, is this part called the threshold, where you have to make some really hard choice. That's the 6th part. And then lastly, I call it the unlock now, because when you follow this, you do get unlocked, but ultimately giving yourself permission to follow this pull. So that's the path to what I think is not just doing work, not just swinging your hammer or showing up to do the writing or the design or the mothering or whatever. It's when you take that and you're like, oh no, God is pulling me towards this. This is more than just work. It's holy work. It's something sacred.
Yes.
And so just talking through that with people over the years here has just shown me, no, I want to talk about this more. And I feel like God's leading me to talk about it more and help people unlock that pull that's inside of them.
Yes. So good. And I'm curious, just to circle back to the idea of, I think everyone is creative. And I would agree with that. We've kind of had conversations on the podcast around that before, but do you want to just share a little more on your thoughts on that?
Well, for example, 2 examples come to my head. I was meeting with my tax guy like two weeks ago, and I was just talking to him about this, and he and I have to be polar opposites, personality wise, just how we act, how we live. We have to be polar opposites. And that's a good thing because I need him to be very detail oriented and be looking at all the numbers in the taxes.
Yes.
And I asked him about when he was younger, when he was a kid. And I said, okay, so were you drawn towards math and keeping track of things and numbers? And he goes, oh yes, for as long as I can remember. And for him, like that's an art. That is something he is pulled towards, and he's really good at it. And he goes, but you asked me to speak in front of a huge crowd or something. And he's like, I will be panicked out of anything. I'm not doing that at all. I don't want to do that. And he has to be creative in how he handles these numbers for people. That's his art. And the second story is about my wife, honestly. Like she always, we've been married 21 years. And the first few years, she's always like, I'm not creative. I'm not creative. I'm not creative. And I'm like, she is the most creative person I know. Like she just, we homeschool our kids. We have 4 of them. And she's like, well, I want my son to have some time to hang out with the kids. What should I do? I'm going to create a Lego class. And she puts it up on Facebook, and all of a sudden all these people sign up, and she creates activities for him to do. And all of a sudden he's got
That's
friends
awesome.
coming over to play Legos. And she's just incredibly creative, but she wouldn't identify as that. And I just think that's wrong, because I think God is up there saying, ooh, I want to create some stuff with you guys. And he's got all these ideas. And if we give ourselves time to actually listen to them, we can make some great stuff.
Yes. Yes. And I think there's for some people, there's like a point in life where, kind of like you were talking about, maybe someone said, oh, you're not creative, or they kind of put that label of like, I can't be creative on themselves, even though we're all, I know you've said this on other podcasts, but like made in the image of God, and he's creator. So, so cool.
Well, I was there. I don't know if I've said this story before, but I had an assistant in one of my roles, and I don't think she would mind hearing me say this, but like, she wasn't a great assistant. She just wasn't very good. And
she would admit to this, maybe.
Yes. Oh yeah. She knows this story, and it turns out good for her in that, like, she just wasn't great. And I knew we were going to have a hard conversation. And one time my wife and I went out to dinner with her and her husband, and we got to dinner, and he just goes, we just got, you get into a good discussion. He's like, oh, she is so forgetful, and she forgets things all the time. And I'm like, oh no, like, I'm forgetful. I need her to be like someone who remembers things and
stays on top of it for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Her and I started talking about that, and we just started diving deep into that. And she goes, well, if I'm being honest, like, I went to design school back in the day. And I'm like, really? Okay. And she goes, yeah, all the people I follow on Instagram are artists, and all the things I love looking at is design and art stuff. And I'm like, well, what are you doing being an assistant? And she goes, well, I had this boyfriend back in the day who very much discouraged that and told me it was stupid. And I was like, oh my gosh, where's this guy? And I'm going to go beat him up, And as we talked through that, she realized, oh my gosh, I'm a creative. I want to be a designer. And so we got her on a plan, and she's been a designer for the last few years, and she's just loving it and killing it. And
so cool.
Like, that's where like you said, you have these people that can tell you it's stupid or beat it up or discourage you. And that's where you have to look back in your own history to what you were drawn to as a kid before anybody told you it was a bad idea.
Right. Yes. Yes. So I would love to kind of go through these different stages of this holy work concept. And I really resonate with all of it. I think there's, so many things I'm like, oh yeah, I can kind of see that in my past. And like, oh, maybe I'm, I think all of us are going to be like, okay, what stage are we at? Kind of.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So I think it might help to talk through it a little bit. And I'm curious, when was the first time that you felt sort of that pull in your life?
Man, I think I remember being in college, and I didn't have a great relationship with God at the time. It was a little Christian school. I went to Judson College in Elgin, Illinois. Okay. And they have a great creative program. And I remember sitting in the dorm room she wasn't my wife at the time, but with Mandy, she was my girlfriend or fiance at the time. And I was doing design stuff because I just didn't know what else to do when you're kind of good at drawing. I wasn't good enough to be an animator, but I felt pulled towards writing and acting, actually. Cool. I don't think this was a bad decision at all, but I remember thinking, boy, I feel more pulled towards that. But this thing I've already started is pretty safe, and I'm going to go with the safe thing. But I remember that first nudge of, hey, there's something else. And so then I got my first jobs, and I hated them, if I'm being completely honest. If I did not like being a designer, I hate saying that because there's so many people who love it, and I love that it happens, but I didn't love it. I wanted to be in a band, and I wanted to write songs, and I wanted to do all this stuff. And that was really where what I associated it at the time with was discontentment. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And I got really angry about it. And so I tried to fill that hole. I was being pulled towards more, but I didn't know I was just laying the foundation for the future. And so I just complained a lot. I had some addictions in my life at that time where I was trying to fill this hole. And that's oftentimes what happens when we feel this unsettledness or this stuckness, is we try to solve it with lots of different things to make us feel better. And that's what I did those first years. But I think I've been being pulled for years and years and years. And for better or worse, if I had a better relationship with God early on, I think he would have guided me in a different way if I was actually listening to him. And I have zero regrets about any of it. But that, I think I felt pulled way back then. I just thought it was me being just a chronic malcontent or something, you know? So
yes, makes sense. And I think something that's pretty cool is how I've heard people say, you know, God doesn't waste any part of your story. And how he can use even those decisions that maybe we were like, we're going to choose the safe route, or, you know, I'm not sure if I want to go there, that he can still come back around and use those things in the future, which is so cool.
There's no right or wrong answer. There's just a choice and a decision. And as long as you're doing the practices and seeking him, he's going to work all things together for the good.
Exactly. So then from there, was it belief was the next one?
Okay. Yeah. I also call that the proof sometimes. I like the belief better. Because it's really, do you believe God put it there? Do you believe he put this pull there? And do you believe you can do it? There's two parts to it there. And where I really got inspired by this part was from Exodus 31. And it's when Moses is up on the mountain, he's getting all these instructions for the tent of meeting and the tabernacle where honestly, those were the places that God's presence was going to be on earth. And so cool. He wasn't, at the time, he wasn't like just available like the Holy Spirit is now. He was like, you go up to the mountaintop and Moses can talk to God. But what he was doing was he was creating spaces on the earth for him to dwell in the tent of meeting and the tabernacle. And I'm sure there's theologians who will correct some of the way I say those things right now. But as I was reading that, Moses comes down to the bottom and he gives it to this guy named Bezalel. And it says Bezalel was filled with the Spirit to make all this stuff. And in the commentary of the Bible I read, it said the first person the Bible mentions as being filled with the Spirit is this guy Bezalel. So as I was reading that, this was 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know. As I was reading it, I was just like, the first person the Bible mentions as being filled with the Spirit is an artist, is a creative,
right?
Is someone who God wants to make something with. Like, what an honor that is. Like, and I worked in the creative field, and I was like, who else is talking about this? Like, is anybody, you know, and I started Googling, and I just didn't find a ton of stuff. Jordan Rayner is one of the folks that is talking about it quite a bit. But other than that, there wasn't. And God just put it really on my heart to talk about that. And so I started talking about that with the creative team, and like how it is an honor to be a creative and to open yourself up to what God wants to make with you. And so that's really where, there's some proof there that God put these things inside of us. And the fifth word of the Bible is created. In the beginning, God created. And then right after that, it says man is made in God's image. Well, the only thing we know about God's image at that point is that he's a creator. That's the only thing we know.
It's kind of like mind-blowing. Yes, that's really cool.
And I just, as I read those things, you just kind of look around and be like, how come creatives who are professional creatives who are believers aren't just holding this like a badge of honor? And how come we're not talking about it and taking our work that seriously? And so that's part of the proof section. And the second part is, if God really put it there, that means you should follow it. You should listen. And do you believe this is real? And immediately when you start to believe this is real, and that, like I was telling you about my assistant, well, I might be able to be a designer or something. Well, immediately you will then hit that third part, which is the war.
Oof, yes.
Immediately. Like it's one of your questions here was like, how would you describe the war that's happening in people? I liken it to the beginning of the movie Saving Private Ryan. Okay. Have you seen this movie?
I don't think so. No, I've definitely heard of it, but I don't think I ever saw it.
Yeah. It's a war movie directed by Steven Spielberg. It's an incredible movie. The first 20 minutes are super brutal. I mean, it's a war movie, and some people say it's the most accurate depiction of a World War II battle ever. Wow. And these soldiers, it starts off with this movie, and these soldiers, there's about 20 soldiers in this boat, and they're coming up to the beach of Normandy. And that was this huge battle in World War II. They're coming up to the beach, and the captain is Tom Hanks, and he's sitting there and he's drinking his water and his hand is shaking because he's terrified. And they're about to open the front of this boat, and these soldiers are going to run out. And I liken the battle to something like that. When you start to believe that you have something worth saying, worth doing, worth creating with God, the front of this boat goes down, and the enemy is up on the top of this mountain, just waiting for that boat to come down with a sniper rifle. And he's just unloading. At the beginning of this movie, there's a gun that the Germans used that shot something like 1,300 rounds a minute.
Whoa.
I mean, it's so fast. And that's what I like in this war too, is the minute you pop your head up a little bit, there's an enemy roaring around like a lion waiting to devour you. And whether that's fear or doubt or any of those things, you are immediately stuck into that. And Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art, is my favorite in describing this in an amazing way. If you haven't read that, it's the best.
That's awesome. I remember you recommending it. So I had gotten it back then, and you're right. It's like, if there's anything worth pursuing, that there's going to be that resistance that comes up against it. And how do you fight in that war?
Yeah. Recognizing it is the first step, and knowing that this is a battle. I was with my parents this last couple of weeks, and there was something I wanted to read to my dad. I'm working on this book, and I'm not even sure this part of it will go in the book, but there was something I wanted to read him, and I knew I wanted to read it to him. We were on a drive, and I was like, "Oh, now's the perfect time." But immediately it was like, "Yeah, it's not going to go well." He's not going to like it.
Those thoughts and doubts that come in.
Yeah. It was just immediate. Like, why are you even writing about that? Because it was partly from a part of his past and his story. And why are you even writing that? Who are you to bring this up? Like, just on and on and on and on. And then another voice is, just do it tomorrow. Read it again tomorrow.
Yeah.
Try it again tomorrow. And eventually I was literally sitting there, and this is so funny because I hadn't really done this. And I was like, well, okay, let's run this through the holy work process. All right. I have a poll to talk to him. I do believe God put that there. I am now in the war. What would I advise somebody else to do? And I was like, you should read it to him. And so I just forced myself to do it. And I read it to him, and we had an incredible discussion about it. And I learned a bunch of things I didn't know, and it turned out great. But it's pushing through and showing up, even though you don't feel like it. That is the war. And knowing that it is going to be a war. And that's just part of the gig. If you don't feel any of that, then I don't think you're pushing yourself quite hard enough to cause a little bit of a ruckus, Right.
Yeah. It's almost a confirmation or okay, maybe I'm headed in the right direction because I'm getting that resistance. I'm facing the war, facing the battle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we really believe that God is inspiring all of this, then I should trust the outcome to him. And that's where it was like, why am I fighting this? Like, I love my dad. My dad loves me. Yeah, this might get into a little uncomfortableness because it's this weird story from our past. But ultimately, I'm going to leave the outcome to him. And do I actually trust him?
Yeah.
And once we actually do, like maybe my dad, what if he did get upset or any of those things? That's not my choice or my thing to control. I just have to listen to the pull and obey.
Yeah. I think that's really what's at the root of a lot of our hesitance is not necessarily fully believing essentially God is who he says he is and that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. Right. And that we really can trust him. I find myself struggling with that all the time. The idea of like, it's all on me. I have to like figure this out. It's like, no, it's really okay. Like God is the one who's going to make it happen. Yeah. And recently heard Jamie Winship. I don't know if you've heard any of his stuff, but just been like mind blown because he talks a lot about the idea of fear and, it being a warning sign, a signal that, something is wrong. And that could be that your mindset is wrong and the way you're thinking about God is wrong. But that it's not a way to make decisions or to like
Yes.
guide your life, So I'm like, whew,
Yeah.
so good.
Another one, if you love that, is a guy named Chip Dodd. He wrote a book called The Voice of the Heart.
Ooh.
And he says there are 8 core emotions, 8 core feelings, as he calls them, that we all go through. And they all sound negative. It's anger, fear, shame, guilt, sadness, loneliness, I think hurt, and glad. So you hear that list and you're like, well, glad's the only good one, But what he says is, no, they're all gifts. And when you think about fear, the gift of fear is, okay, I'm a little afraid this might not work, whatever it is. Okay, that fear, the healthy version is, okay, what do I need to do to prepare? What do I need to do to get ready for this thing so that so that it doesn't fail? Like that fear causes us to make things happen. The impairment of it is obviously anxiety, where you just worry about everything and you go down the rabbit hole. Anxiety is not healthy fear. That's toxic fear.
Exactly.
But ultimately, like the Bible says, fear's gift, though, is wisdom as you go through that. So when we look at, fear, I don't want to feel fear. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. You can't just force yourself not to be afraid. We're humans, but listen to that fear and let it help you.
Yes. Love that. So after we went through the war, and I'm sure there's moments, like you said, there's kind of the little micro like pulls that happen every day, but on the large scale. So then what was the next step after the war?
Yeah. After the war is kind of this middle one I call the practices. It's not necessarily a step, but it's in there. It's kind of something that needs to underlie all of them. And the biggest part of the practices is actually setting a time aside to seek God.
Yeah.
And I've had the most impact through journaling. That's been the most effective to me. It was a few years ago, it was 2010, that me and my wife were going through a really hard time. And it was kind of we got married in 2001. And those first 9 years of our marriage is that kind of discontent time of my life. And her and I were in a rough spot in that 2010 area. And I was out running and I was just really struggling. And I got home and I felt the nudge. At the time, I didn't know he was pulling me. God, I call it a nudge, but he was pulling me to write her a letter and just tell her the truth of everything I was thinking and feeling, warts and all.
Yeah.
And so I did that. I wrote this letter. It was really hard to write and really hard for her to hear, but it was the truth of what I was actually thinking and feeling. I don't even know if any of those thoughts or feelings were right, because I don't necessarily think you should believe everything you think, as Andy Andrews says.
Yes.
He says, don't believe everything you think. But I needed her to know what was going on.
Yeah, I think there's definitely value in just the honesty and telling the truth.
Yeah. And a few weeks went by after us getting honest with each other, and our relationship started to move in a direction of getting closer. And I thought to myself, boy, if I was honest with Mandy and we're getting closer, I wonder what would happen if I started being honest with God on a regular basis. And so that's when I woke up early and I said, okay, God, I don't have much to offer you, but I will read one chapter of the Bible, and I'm going to start writing what I actually think about it, what I'm actually thinking and feeling about it. And that's what I started doing. And so I'd read a chapter of the Bible, and I got out this journal. It's actually this one right here. I'm working on this book. And so I'm digging up all the old stuff. And it says it's January 2010 through May 2011.
Oh, cool. And
I just started writing whatever it was that I thought about this. And I wasn't doing it for any outcome. It was just to be honest. And what happened though is you start getting out all this stuff that you didn't even know was in there. The Jules Cameron has this book called The Artist Way, and she talks about the morning pages. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I was just getting up, and in her morning pages, you just write for 3 pages, free form. Don't stop writing until you've gotten 3 pages out. And what it does is it gets you through all this petty stuff that's in your head so you can get to the good stuff beneath.
Ooh,
and
really
I didn't
good.
know that's what I was doing, but I was telling God the truth of what I was thinking and feeling.
Yes.
And so that's where the practice is the most important one, is to set aside some time and actually tell the truth of what's going on in your head. If nothing else, it's like a budget for your brain. And I worked for Ramsey for a long time, and we talk about budgeting a lot. And when you journal, you're taking what feels like a bunch of ping pong balls in your head, knocking around all the time,
Mhm.
and you're just getting them out on a piece of paper. And that just gives them all a place to go. And I think that is a powerful exercise. And especially if the phrase we used a lot at Ramsey was, how can we be thought leaders if we don't give ourselves any time to think? Like that, it's impossible.
That's true.
So,
yeah. That's such a great analogy too with the budget. Like,
yeah,
very, very true.
it's a budget for your brain.
Uh-huh.
It most definitely is. And there's this book called The Body Keeps the Score that's out there.
I've heard of it, but I don't think I've ever read it yet, but
It's a very medical feeling book, but it's pretty accessible. And he says, just by the mere fact of writing your thoughts and feelings out on a piece of paper, your doctor visits go down 50% over year as you start to do this. The people who do those things, their anxiety levels go down and doctor visits went down. He's not a believer at all. This is just a doctor who's data finding. Yeah. And as I was doing these things, I didn't know any of that. I was just writing. I was just talking to God. And at the end, I would just say, please be my guide and teacher. And I lift all this stuff up to you. I don't even know if it's right or real, but I give it all to you. And that's those practices that we need to build into our lives.
Yes. And so when you started doing that and kind of implementing the journaling and just getting it out there, right, and telling the truth, then what was kind of the result, the fruit of that in your life?
Great question. I did that like that journal there is January 2010. I did that till about 2015, and I didn't tell anybody that I was doing it. My wife was the only one who knew it because I was getting up early.
Yeah.
But in 2015, I was like, I wonder how it would be to type instead of handwrite. And so I moved over to Evernote, and I would wake up and I would just start typing my thoughts out. And that's when I really started to realize stuff would start happening at work that somebody would bring something up and I'd say, oh, hold on, I have a thought about that. And I'd go back and look at something I'd written or what I'd thought about, and it was available to me. And then it actually helped a project move forward, or it helped org chart be better or something. I don't even know what it was, but there was just this change from me complaining in a journal to, I feel like after 5 years of doing that, I had worked through some of this surface level angst. And then I would wake up, and instead of just complaining, I would think about something that was going on, and I would just write about it to God.
Yeah.
And then when it was done, sometimes that stuff would come up at work and I'd have something there. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what he means by seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. I gave God my firsts with that time, and then opportunities started to come up. And that's when it started to shift. And then I did Evernote for a couple of years. And then I started telling the story. I was like, guys, I don't know, there's something with this journaling thing that is
like, y'all should try this thing.
Yeah. And I started talking about it to more people, and then they started journaling, and they were like, I don't know what's happening. And I'm like, it's so silly because it's verses, and we're just obeying what God is telling us to do. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all this will be added unto you. And this is what that means. Let's actually do it. How about that?
Exactly.
And so that's really where it started to shift. And I started telling some of this story, and shifting to the Evernote thing is where I really started to write more and started to fall in love with that. And like just seeing the path, I'm just like, wow, God, that's really cool. Thank you for that.
Yes. What a gift to be able to look back and see kind of that journey, that path. And so then I think, are we to the threshold?
Well, no, the wilderness is next.
Sorry, the wilderness. Yes. So because we were talking about practices.
Yep.
And then the wilderness. Yeah.
So those practices are the seeking of God throughout this whole process. This next part is the wilderness, where, okay, I'm being pulled. I'm pretty sure that was you, God. I think I can do this. I'm fighting through the war. I know it's a war, but I'm gonna do it. Okay. The wilderness is, I might even just call it the work someday. I heard a great quote that said, the only difference between a society and a wilderness is work. Meaning, like if you have a whole society and there's roads and there's stores and there's pathways to get different places, well, that started out as a deep forest, and somebody had to get out a machete and start making a trail.
True.
So the wilderness feels like you're lost, but you're not. You're on a path and you're just hacking through it. You know, some people come and I talk to them and coach them through it, and they're like, I just feel stuck. And I'm like, you're not stuck. You're on a path. And that came from Chip Dodd one time. I was talking to him about all this. He's the guy who wrote that Voice of the Heart book I was talking about earlier. Him and I were talking about this, and I said that phrase to him a while ago. I said, I don't know. I just feel like I'm maybe stuck. I don't know what to do next. And he goes, oh no, you're on a path.
That's pretty profound, just to even like be okay.
Yeah. The mere fact that people are reaching out and saying they're stuck means they are on a journey.
Right.
It's the people who don't even recognize that and just go with the flow for 30 years and don't push themselves to anything further. Those are the ones who are stuck and they don't even know it. So the wilderness is the work. So say you want to become a mom, or you want to start homeschooling, or you want to start a business, and those are the pulls you have. Well, what's the work you have to do? One lady I was talking to, she wants to start her own business. Well, she has like $72,000 of debt. She can't just stop what she's doing. So that's part of the work that needs to be done. You got to clean up some of your messes.
Yes.
That's part of the work. And then the other side is, well, what if she had never run any kind of business before? She needs to get some experience. She needs to go learn some things. And that's part of the work of moving in that direction. For me, doing the work right now, it's a whole new version of work for me than it was. I'm trying to write what I say 1,000 crappy words a day on this book just to keep going. And that's the work for me right now. And I try to do that in the mornings. So it feels like wilderness. It's not. You are on a path. And that's the work that needs to be done.
Putting in the day after day.
Yep. Showing up.
Yes. It's interesting with like being self-aware enough to know, okay, these are the messes that really need some attention, or, okay, I really am not ready for that level. I need to learn X, Y, or Z first. I think that's good to take stock and figure out, okay, if I'm really wanting that, where am I right now? And what do I need to do? Yeah. It's good.
And honestly, I was talking to somebody the other day, and he goes, we live in Nashville, and so there's tons of songwriters that just want to, do that, and they come and they come to Nashville, and they're like, I'm going to live on nothing and become a songwriter and live the dream. Well, the guy who I was talking to, he works with a lot of speakers and songwriters, and he goes, man, but they got a lot of mess to clean up before they go after this life. Like they got 2 kids. They can't just leave their kids and start going out to bars every night.
Right.
Like you can't just pack up and leave. And I think part of the pull, like if you're feeling pulled to become a songwriter or writer or start your business or whatever, part of God's pull there is to pull you through those messes so that you clean them up. If you just ignore all of it, you're just going to create more of a mess.
Right.
So there are a lot of things we have to look at in the wilderness and get through before we can do what we need to do. Like I said, those first early jobs I had, I complained a lot. And I remember getting back, I was making a band poster. I told you I was in a band.
Oh yeah.
I was making a band poster one day at lunch at this old job, and I got to, it's 12:45 and I'm about done with the band poster, and I get back to 1:00 and okay, time to get back to the stuff I need to design for this job. And I was working on a sprinkler brochure, kind of a boring thing or whatever. But I remember this distinct little thought popping into my head that said, hey, you have a pretty cool job. I wonder if you tried as hard on this sprinkler brochure as you did your band poster.
Ooh, yes.
And I just remember thinking, all right, well, okay, all right, what would be a cool sprinkler brochure, Yeah. And so I did. I made the best sprinkler brochure I could this time. Instead of complaining about it, I made this sprinkler brochure. And what I learned is that God is just saying, hey, rock this thing first. Do the best you can do. And once you do that, the best of your ability, then we can talk about what's next.
Right. Kind of a stewardship thing.
Exactly.
Stewardship issue. Yeah.
That's right. So that's the work of the wilderness.
Yeah. So then we get to the threshold.
Yeah, there is a threshold. And this was one that I'm just going through in a really large way over this last 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But also it's a small one. Like the threshold with my dad the other day, the story I was telling was, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yes.
And so I pulled out the phone and said, hey, Dad, I want to read you something. That's the threshold. I had to make a decision and then do something to cause the unlock. If you don't do that, if you don't make that really hard choice and step over that threshold, then nothing's going to happen. And so for me, I wrestled and clawed because I loved Ramsey. I still do. I loved working there. I loved all the creatives there. I loved all the people there. But I was really feeling pulled. And there were lots of reasons why God was showing me that this was the time. But if I didn't ever say it out loud, if I didn't ever cross this threshold, I don't know what would have happened. If I wouldn't have done those things and say, no, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to say some really hard things out loud. Like, I think it might be time to go.
Yeah.
That's a threshold that I have to cross. And I had all those messes cleaned up. Mandy and I, over this last bit of time, we paid off all our debt. We paid off our house. Like, we did all of these things to be able to do this. But it doesn't mean it wasn't really hard.
Right. Yeah. It didn't make it any easier necessarily, but you're prepared in a way. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so I don't know what each person's threshold is, but there is a thing that will push you to your core, and it will be really difficult and shine a light on all your fears and all your inadequacies. I don't know, but you have to cross this thing in order to really do the holy work that God is pulling you towards.
Yes. And then we get to the unlock.
The unlock.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that terminology as well, just with like, because if you feel kind of stuck or whatever, that it's kind of like, okay, it's now unlocked. You are free
to do the thing.
To do the thing. Yes.
I used to call it the permission, but maybe that's because I'm a 9 and I always want other people's permission. And
Yes. I loved that too. I was like, wow, this is so me. I'm always like asking people's input, quote unquote, which is great. And I think in a way that's really served me in my jobs and things like that and building relationships. But at the same time, there's a certain point where it's like, it's okay. Like I have permission, or if God is asking me to step out in this, I just need to step instead of waiting for 10 people to tell me that it's okay.
It's so hard, isn't it?
Yes.
I had a great leader in my life 10 years ago, and he goes, "Oh, Luke, I got you figured out." And I was like, "You don't have me figured out, And he goes, "Yeah, I do. You come in here and you're like, here's what I think we should do. Here's what I want to do about it, and here's why. As long as it's okay with you."
Yes.
And I would always go, "As long as it's okay with you." And I was like, "God dang it, he got me." It's so frustrating.
So true. Or the no worries either way,
Yeah. What do you think? Do you like the unlock better or the permission?
Oof. I think just because of the 9-ness of it, I like the permission because that just kind of resonates with me. But I definitely like the image of the unlock as well, of just like, okay, now it's been like released almost, like you are free. But I don't know, for whatever reason, the permission kind of stuck with me for sure.
Okay. So. Yeah. I don't know which one I'll end up going with long term, but it's some version of that.
I think you told a story about your wife or
my grandma.
Your grandma. Okay.
Yeah. I actually have this picture on my desk. I know the viewers can't see it, but this is the picture for you.
Oh yeah. That's so cool.
So I'm like 8 years old or something, or maybe younger, up on this ladder, and my grandpa's holding the ladder, and then my grandma is kind of standing down there, and I can just hear her going, "Go on, Luke, get up there, get that thing." And you just did what she told you to do.
Yes.
When I don't know how your grandma is, but if she said do it, I'm like, "Yes, ma'am, I got it." Yeah. And I just remember like, that is she's saying there, and God is saying like, "Go on, get up there, do it."
Yeah. Like,
you have the permission, you have it. What is holding you back? You have everything you need right now to move this thing forward.
Exactly.
And I mean, you've been doing this podcast for how long now? 2 years?
Yeah, a little bit over 2 years, 2.5 almost. Which is crazy.
The Rachel from 2 years ago compared to now, has so much more experience and confidence. And if she wouldn't have started because she was scared or didn't think she had what it took to do it, like we'd be missing out on this. And that's, it's like, go on, get up there, do it, move forward and
do the thing. Yes.
Yes. And that's the unlock. Like eventually you're like, oh no, I have everything I need. I can do this, and I'm going to mess up. I'm going to screw something up, I'm sure, but I'm in the arena. I'm trying,
Exactly. Yeah. Is it Brene Brown who talks about like getting in the arena? Just,
yeah. So I think it's actually from she made it
or
famous,
she talked about it. Yeah.
Wasn't it Roosevelt?
Yes. Yeah. That's right. She's quoting him.
The man in the arena is the one who counts, not the critic.
Yes.
The critic will just beat you up but they're not even in the game. They're not even playing. So screw them.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love that you have a picture of that moment with you kind of in your office area, because I think that could be really profound for people to maybe find, is there an image from your childhood, some sort of formative thing that you can look at and be like, that's like the core me that God created, or in that moment, like, here's an image that reminds me to take that next step,
Yeah, to give you the strength. It's a great idea. I walk people through a holy work training, and in the first couple sessions, what I'll do is to bring back to the second session, I'll have them go find some pictures of themselves from 8 to 10 years old, and then just spread them out on a table in front of them and just make observations about that kid, because you just forget, or you have this picture in your mind that is one thing. And then once you just take a step back and look, like, your picture gets changed some. That was actually from a counselor coach I had. He suggested doing that. And it's partly where that picture came from. And it was actually my mom who gave me this picture just a few months ago when I left Ramsey to just help me as going through this. She gave that to me to have on the desk to be a reminder. So thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. I love it. That's so great. I feel like moms are good at sometimes giving us that little nudge as well.
Yeah.
Because they see some of those things in us and are like, you can do it. Yeah.
Exactly. That's right.
So cool. So what's interesting is this will probably air like the beginning of January.
Okay.
So, we're coming into a new year, 2023. I feel like this really, if we can kind of wrap our brains around it and start to be intentional about like reflecting what is that pull that I've had in my life, and starting to do that work, that I could see that being like a really cool thing to start at the beginning of the year, just sort of fresh slate. And I don't know, how do you see this playing into just, our wholeness as a person? Because I feel like it's so integral into who we are in a way.
Yeah. I think when we're not acknowledging these pulls, really that's the best way to put it. When we're not acknowledging them, they add up in our heads. They add up to stress or something. Or if we are in one of those stuck places, that would be something I would encourage your listeners to do is, hey, at the beginning of the year, if you're feeling stuck or unsettled, go back, pull out a bunch of pictures of yourself from 8 to 10, just spread them out and just make observations about that kid, not from a judgmental place, but imagine if you were looking at some other kid. Yeah. And just what would you think about that kid is, oh man, they're shy, but man, they're always smiling, or boy, I thought my dad he didn't like me, but look, we're hugging in every one of these pictures, or, just make some observations, because a lot of who you are in those early years is a good indication of who you are meant to be now. And there are lots of things that can get in the way of that. But if you can go back and look at that little person and love that little person, you'll be shown what you should be moving towards now.
Yes. I think that would be really fun. I think I'm going to try that as well. Yeah. So as we're wrapping up today, what do you feel like God's been teaching you lately in this new season?
Anytime I get all anxious about what's going on and I force something, it always goes funky. The phrase that keeps coming to my head over this last few months is receive, don't strive. Ooh. And I have a hard time believing that sometimes, but I think that's what he's teaching me. Like the good things that have happened over this last few months, and honestly, my whole life, if I take a step back, have been gifts that God has provided to me versus me striving and forcing and like, yes, we have to do the work and we have to show up and we have to be kind and we have to do these things. But whenever it turns into like striving panic or something, I don't know. I just don't like the outcome. And then you look back and you see these good things that have happened, and they've all just been gifts that have come. And that's what I feel like he's teaching me. Receive, don't strive.
Love that. It's a message that I need to take deep into me too. So something I like to ask everyone that comes on the show is there something that you would like to share with other artists right now? Because majority of our listeners are probably people who would identify themselves as artists or dancers, musicians, writers, that kind of thing. So
this is one that I'm feeling like I saw that on your list of questions and I was like, I shouldn't do that. Meaning I'm feeling pulled towards it, but it's I'm going to do that. Okay. And you can decide whether you leave it or not. It probably will take 4 minutes to read through it. Okay. But I'll just read it and you can edit it how you would like it to, but I just wanted to read this to everyone.
Cool.
And if you're listening, I just want you to take a second and I want you to close your eyes and I just want you to take a breath. So go ahead. Whatever you're doing, unless you're driving, don't close your eyes. But I just want you to close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath. 3 or 4 seconds in, 7 or 8 seconds out. Let your shoulders relax. There's no hurry here. There's nothing to accomplish. There's nothing to control. You just need to be right here, right where you are, right now. And I think the rest can wait. Now, while you're in that space, I just want you to imagine God. He's standing on the coast of California. He's peaceful. He has a little smile on his face, one of excitement, anticipation. And he's looking out at this amazing ocean. The view is incredible. There's huge waves crashing into the rocks. The sun is shining down and warming the sand. And his face, in the way that makes him close his eyes and breathe deeply. That's how the sun is shining down on his face. He opens his eyes and he looks down at his hand. And he's holding a thick rope that fills most of his left hand. He has calluses on his hand from years and years of pulling on it. As he looks back out at this amazing ocean, he smiles again. And he's thinking of someone in particular he wants to join him. You, on the other hand, are standing in New York City, in the middle of Times Square. There's buildings everywhere. There's people everywhere. There's noise and lights and billboards all around. And you look down and you realize there's a thick rope tied around your waist. Your brow furrows, your head tilts. What is this? I got to get this thing off of me. I have somewhere to be. You try to push it down so you can step out of it, but this thing won't budge. You look down and try to see where the rope goes, but it disappears down around the corner. Nobody seems to notice this. People step over it like it doesn't even exist, but you know it does. I wonder why no one else sees it, you think. All of a sudden, you feel a subtle tug on this rope. It's very subtle. You almost didn't even notice it. And you think, I have to be somewhere. I have a meeting. Maybe no one will notice. So you take this rope with you to your office. It's pretty light, actually. It isn't forcing you to go with it. Nobody makes any comments about it. Your meeting finishes and you feel it again, this little tug, this pull. The rope is trying to pull me. I got to figure out how to get this thing off. This can't be right. You make it home, you get a knife out and you try to cut through the rope. Immediately, you know that's not going to work. As you sleep that night, everything is quieter. You still hear the noise of the city through your windows, but you can hear your thoughts a little more clearly, and you feel it again. A little pull. So you sit up in bed. I got to figure this out. I have things to do tomorrow. So you start following the rope, down your steps, out to the street. It's dark outside, but as you try to follow the rope and go after it, you have all this extra rope you're dragging around with you. It bunches up in circles, and you actually get pretty heavy when it's all bunched up in coils. Exhausted, you sit on your front steps. With your head in your hands, you yell out, "What is this? What is going on?" And as you sit there, you see the coils around you slowly start to unwind. Something is pulling the other end of this thing. All the coils are undone, and the rope is a solid line again, heading down the street. And again, it slightly pulls. just with slightly more force this time. The rope isn't going away. You have a choice to make. Am I going to let this pull me? Am I going to follow this pull? Where's it going? All of a sudden you hear a voice in your head. You have no idea what I have planned. What was that? Who's there? No answer comes, but you know you heard something. Or was it more of a feeling? Did I hear something? The rope pulls again. What if I just let it pull me, you think? What if I just let go? Where does it end? You have a choice to make. Imagine if you finally just let go and let the rope pull you. You would have to go through some really tough stuff just to get out of New York City alone. What if it goes farther than New York? You'd have to go through some wilderness, some hills, some mountains, some desert. You would have to get pulled through the whole country, storms and desert plains and Nebraska and dark nights and cold mornings. And throughout all of it, you wouldn't even be able to see the beach. You wouldn't even know that's where you're going. You would only have this little rope giving you a tiny bit of hope that you are going somewhere, that through all the struggle, that there is surely someone on the other end pulling it. You just have to let it pull you. So I encourage anybody who's listening, relax and let the rope pull you.
That was so good. Yes. Thank you for sharing and taking time to read that.
That's what I want the creatives to hear.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. So just as a final question for fun is, what is one of your favorite things right now? So it could be really anything, any of your favorite things.
The biography Bono wrote recently. It's called Surrender. He's the singer of U2, and it's so great. Like, I had it sitting out here, and as I looked at that question, I was like, "Oh, this is it." He's got this section that I had underlined the other day, and it said, "Some arrogance is essential to the creative process," he says. The very idea that your private thoughts or feelings are worth sharing with anyone outside your family or friends is already kind of arrogant. Arrogance is the exit and the entry point to the humiliation that art requires. Not unrelated is a dubious courage that when you find yourself out of your depth in troubled waters, you will discover how to swim. Another daft but true idea that creativity seems to depend on. I just love it. It's a great book. Yeah.
That's so good. It'll be fun to check out too. Yes. And I would love to let people know how they can connect with you and your work. And I'm super excited for your new book whenever it releases into the world. So
yeah, it'll be a little while, but we're getting there. The best way would be, if you like some of the things I've talked about or done, just go to holywork.com, and there's a newsletter there. I write 3 times a week just to encourage and guide people along the way with what I'm feeling that day. And so that's the best way to do it, holywork.com. And the second is honestly LinkedIn at this point. Like, it sounds like a nerdy place to go get your resume ready, but there's a lot of great creatives doing some cool stuff up there now. And that's where I'm putting some writing too. Eventually I'll get to the Instagram and all that stuff, but not quite yet. Those are the 2 best, holywork.com and lame LinkedIn, although it's not that lame anymore. But
exactly. I recently started getting your newsletter, and it is super cool. It's good. Literally like, it's not what you would think of as like the traditional weekly or whatever email that you get from people. So it is just like writing, and it's very, it helps you think and like process. And
that's why I hate calling it a newsletter, because it's not really a newsletter. It's just like, it's writings. And they're not, some are a little longer than others, but mostly they're easy to read and quick reads. So that's the best way. And once you sign up for that, you'll have my email address so you can talk or chat or whatever you need to do.
Perfect. That sounds great. Yeah. So this has been just so incredible. And I'm super grateful that our paths connected and that we were able to have this time together today. So thank you for taking the time to be part of the podcast. Appreciate you.
Thank you. You have an incredible spirit about you and joy. And I just pray that infects everyone who listens, and that your goal here of building this thing you're doing just takes off, and you'll be in my thoughts as we move forward.
Thank you so much. That was such an incredible conversation, and I'm so grateful for Luke taking the time to really walk with us through the pull, the belief, the war, the practices, the wilderness, the threshold, and the unlock. I encourage you to check out holywork.com and to subscribe to his weekly messages. You can find all the links, the full show notes, and additional resources on our website, creativeimpactpodcast.com. If you're listening to this in real time and are going to be at TDEA this week, which is the Texas Dance Educators Association convention, I would love to see you there. I'm going to be presenting on both Wednesday evening and Thursday morning, and I'll have a booth in the exhibit hall as well. Come by and say hello, as I'd love to get to meet you in person. If you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe to the show so that each new episode is ready and waiting for you. And if you're enjoying the podcast and you'd be interested in supporting the show, I'd be so honored to have you as a patron. You can check out our Patreon community at creativeimpactpodcast.com/PATREON. Patrons get exclusive bonus content and a behind-the-scenes look at creating the podcast. Again, you can learn more at creativeimpactpodcast.com/Patreon. Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Impact Podcast. The music for the show was produced by Michael Cash. Until next time, remember that you were designed to create. You were made to inspire. Continue living with purpose and making an impact. See you next time, friends.